The church stood at the center of town, its white steeple casting a long shadow over the gathered crowd. Eleanor stood at the altar, not in joy, but in silent dread, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Sheriff Clayton Thorpe stood beside her, his polished boots gleaming under the afternoon sun, a victorious smile playing on his lips. To the townsfolk, it was a perfect match, the lawman and the seamstress. To Eleanor, it was a cage being locked shut, one gilded bar at a time. As the preacher began to speak, Eleanor's eyes drifted past the crowd, past the storefronts, to the edge of the tree line where the pines grew thick. A lone figure sat on a chestnut maury, cloaked in shadow and silence. It was Silas Kane, the man they called the scarred outcast. His face was half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, a web of old scars marking the skin that was visible. He never came to town, yet he was watching. He gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of his head. The preacher asked if anyone objected, his voice echoing in the tense silence. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at Clayton, seeing the cold certainty in his eyes, the ownership. She looked back at the tree line, but the rider was gone. In that moment of emptiness, a strange clarity washed over her. She knew that saying yes to Clayton was a slow death. "Stop," she said, her voice trembling but clear. The congregation gasped. Clayton's smile vanished. "I cannot marry you," Eleanor declared, stepping back from the altar. Clayton's face transformed from shock to a fury so intense it seemed to darken the church. Murmurs erupted like wildfire. Eleanor turned and fled, her white dress hiked up as she ran down the aisle, past the horrified faces of the women who had envied her position. She ran not toward safety, but toward the forest, toward the unknown. She ran from the life she was expected to live. She found him at the base of the mountain trail, as if he had been waiting. Silas sat on his horse, his posture guarded. Up close, the scars on his face were stark against the rugged lines of his jaw. "You shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice a low rasp unused to conversation. "He'll burn the town down looking for you." Eleanor looked back at the steeple, then up at the man everyone feared. "Then I better not be in town," she replied, her resolve hardening. Silas hesitated, his gaze searching her face for the hesitation he expected to find. Instead, he found only a desperate, quiet strength that mirrored his own. He extended a hand, calloused and rough. She took it without a second thought, and he pulled her up onto the horse behind him. As they rode into the thickening forest, the sounds of the town faded into the rustle of aspen leaves and the crunch of pine needles under hoof. High in the mountains, they reached a small, weathered cabin. It was sparse but sturdy, built into the side of a hill for shelter. Silas dismounted and helped her down, his touch brief and respectful. "It's not much," he muttered, pushing open the door to reveal a single room with a stone hearth, a simple cot, and a wooden table. "It's freedom," Eleanor whispered, stepping inside. For the first time in years, she felt she could breathe. That night, a fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Eleanor sat on a stool, wrapped in a wool blanket Silas had given her. He sat across from her, carving a piece of wood with a worn knife, his movements precise. The silence was not uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken questions. She watched him, this man branded a monster by the town, seeing only the quiet dignity in the way he kept his distance, respecting her space. "Why do they hate you?" she asked softly. The knife paused. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Clayton's father," Silas finally said, not looking up. "I was his deputy. I found evidence he was stealing land, killing homesteaders. Before I could go to the marshal, a fire started. I pulled him out, but the scars, he told the town I started it, that I was jealous." Clayton buried the truth with his father. Eleanor felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. He had been a hero, and they had made him a villain to protect a legacy of corruption. "So you came up here to live in silence," she said, To survive, he corrected, finally meeting her eyes. The firelight softened the scars, revealing the weary, honorable man beneath. In that moment, the fear she had been told to feel for him vanished, replaced by a profound sense of injustice. Days turned into a week. Eleanor mended his old shirts while he hunted and chopped wood. They moved around each other with a growing ease, a partnership forming in the quiet routines. She learned that his silence was thoughtfulness, his distance a form of respect. One evening, he returned from the creek with wildflowers, dropping them on the table without a word. She smiled, a genuine smile, and placed them in a tin cup by the window. The peace was shattered by the thunder of hooves. Eleanor looked out the window to see a posse of 10 men, led by Clayton, riding up the mountain trail. Silas grabbed his rifle, his expression hardening into the grim mask of a cornered wolf. "There's a cave behind the waterfall," he said quickly, pushing her toward the back door. "Don't, no matter what you hear, do not come out until it's silent." "I won't leave you," Eleanor protested, her hand gripping his arm. Silas cupped her face, his rough thumb brushing her cheek. It was the first time he had touched her with such intention. "You are the only good thing that has happened to me in 10 years, he said, his voice thick. "I am not letting him take you. Go." He kissed her forehead, a fleeting gesture of desperate tenderness, and then pushed her out the door. Eleanor ran, her lungs burning as she ducked behind the frozen waterfall, slipping into the dark mouth of the cave. She heard the shouts, then the sickening crack of gunfire. She pressed her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face, reciting a silent prayer with every echo. The gunfire was relentless, a storm of violence that seemed to last an eternity. She curled into a ball, clinging to the memory of his hand in hers. Silence, a silence so complete it was louder than the gunfire. Eleanor waited, her body trembling with cold and fear. Finally, she crept out from behind the waterfall. The cabin door was splintered, her heart seized. She stumbled toward it, expecting the worst. She found Silas leaning against the doorframe, his arm bleeding, but standing. Around him, the posse was on the ground, disarmed and cowering. Clayton lay in the mud, his face bruised, staring up at Silas in disbelief. "They know the truth now," Silas said, his voice hoarse but steady. He held up a leather-bound journal, the original ledger from Clayton's father, proving decades of corruption. "I kept it. For a day like this." He tossed it to one of the other men. "You can either hang an innocent man, or finally be men of honor. Choose now." One by one, the men picked up their hats and mounted their horses, their faces a mixture of shame and newfound resolve. Clayton scrambled to his feet, his authority shattered. He pointed a trembling finger at Eleanor. This isn't over. But his men were already leaving. He was alone. Silas stepped between them, his presence a wall of quiet fury. Clayton, finally seeing his own insignificance, mounted his horse and rode away without another word. Eleanor ran to Silas, throwing her arms around him despite his wound. He winced but held her, his arm wrapping around her protectively. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. She pulled back, looking at his face, not the scars, but the man. "No," she said, a smile breaking through her tears. "It's just starting." For the first time, she saw a crack in his stoic mask, the hint of a smile touching the corner of his mouth. Weeks later, a new sign was carved above the cabin door. It read simply, "Kane Homestead." The town, shamed by the revelation of the Thorpe family's crimes, had voted in a new sheriff. They had come up the mountain, not with guns, but with supplies and apologies. Silas had accepted them with his usual quiet dignity, but he declined to return to town. His home was now on the mountain, with Eleanor by his side. The final scene showed them on the porch at dusk, the valley spread out below them like a green and gold tapestry. Eleanor rested her head on Silas' shoulder, his hand holding hers. They did not need the town's approval or the comfort of crowds. They had each other, a truth carved not by fire, but by choice. As the stars began to appear, they sat in a profound peace of belonging. Two outcasts who had finally found where they were meant to be.